I never thought a simple Thanksgiving visit would expose the darkest secret my family had been hiding. But when I pulled up to my son David's suburban house that cold November morning, I found my 8-year-old grandson Tyler shivering on the street in nothing but a thin t-shirt and shorts, while the temperature sat at a brutal 5 degrees below zero. Through the frosted window, I could see my entire family gathered around their mahogany dining table, laughing and carving turkey like it was any other perfect holiday celebration. What I discovered that day would shatter everything I believed about my son and force me to make a choice that would either save my grandson or destroy our family forever. For years, I'd prided myself on raising David to be a good man. After his father passed when David was 15, it was just the two of us against the world. I worked double shifts at the hospital to put him through college, watched him become a successful marketing executive, and nearly cried with joy when he married his college sweetheart, Sarah, and they had Tyler. Back then, our family felt unbreakable. The house on Maple Street had always been my vision of the American dream realized. David bought it 3 years ago, a pristine colonial with white shutters, a wraparound porch, and enough space for family gatherings that would make Norman Rockwell weep. Every holiday, every birthday, every milestone happened in that house. It was where Tyler took his first steps, where we celebrated David's promotion, where Sarah and David renewed their vows on their 5th anniversary. But something had shifted after the divorce 2 years ago. Sarah moved to Portland for a fresh start, leaving Tyler with David. That's when Jennifer entered the picture. Jennifer arrived like a whirlwind of perfection. She was everything Sarah wasn't. Polished, ambitious, with an MBA from Northwestern and a smile that could sell ice to Eskimos. She spoke fluent French, ran half marathons, and somehow managed to redecorate David's entire house within 3 months of moving in. David seemed intoxicated by her sophistication, her ability to transform his life into something that looked like a magazine spread. But I started noticing small things. Tyler, who used to run to the phone whenever I called, would speak in careful, measured sentences when Jennifer was nearby. Family dinners became formal affairs where Tyler sat quietly while the adults discussed wine pairings and vacation plans to places he couldn't pronounce. When I'd ask to take Tyler for ice cream or to the park, Jennifer would politely suggest that he had homework, or needed to practice piano, or had some other obligation that kept him tethered to her schedule. The phone calls became less frequent. David, who used to check in twice a week, would go weeks without calling. When I'd reach out, Jennifer would answer with her bright, practiced voice, explaining that David was at client dinners, or Tyler was already asleep, or they were just heading out to some event that sounded more like a business meeting than family time. I should have pushed harder. I should have demanded more access to my grandson. But Jennifer had a way of making her restrictions sound reasonable, even necessary. Tyler needs structure, she'd say. We're trying to establish routines that will help him succeed. She spoke about child development like she had a PhD in psychology, citing studies about screen time and the importance of educational activities over mindless entertainment. Looking back, I can see how carefully she was building walls, but at the time, her explanations felt logical. David seemed happy. Tyler was getting good grades. The house looked perfect. What right did I have to question their methods? The warning signs I'd dismissed now felt like neon billboards flashing in my memory. Tyler's bruises, which Jennifer explained away as normal childhood accidents. The way he flinched when she raised her voice. How he'd grown quieter and more withdrawn during family gatherings, sitting at the kids' table even when there were no other children present. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, I'd tried to call Tyler directly, hoping to hear his voice without Jennifer's careful supervision. When he answered, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Hi, Grandma," he said, but something in his tone made my heart clench. "Hey, sweetheart, how are you doing? I miss you so much." There was a long pause before he said, "I miss you too, but I can't talk long. I'm supposed to be doing homework." "What kind of homework do you have on a Saturday?" Another pause. "Jennifer says I need to practice being quiet because I talk too much and it bothers Dad when he's trying to work." Before I could respond, I heard Jennifer's voice in the background, sharp and commanding. "Tyler, who are you talking to?" "My grandma," he replied, and I could hear the fear creeping into his voice. We talked about this. Family time is for family. Say goodbye. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone with a growing sense of unease that I couldn't shake. Now, sitting in my car outside their house on Thanksgiving morning, that unease crystallized into pure horror. Tyler wasn't just outside by accident. He wasn't playing in the yard or waiting for me to arrive. He was standing on the sidewalk in his thin cotton pajamas, his arms wrapped around his small body, his lips blue with cold, tears frozen on his cheeks. I jumped out of my car and ran to him, wrapping him in my coat. His small body was ice cold, trembling so violently I could barely understand what he was trying to say. "Grandma? You came?" His voice was hoarse, like he'd been crying for a long time. "Oh, sweetheart, what are you doing out here? Where's your coat? Where are your shoes?" Tyler looked down at his bare feet, red and swollen from the cold concrete. "Jennifer said I was being too loud during breakfast and that I needed to learn how to be grateful for what I have. She said some kids don't get Thanksgiving dinner at all, so I should appreciate the lesson about patience." My blood turned to ice. "How long have you been out here?" He shrugged, a gesture that broke my heart. "Since before the sun came up, I think. Dad left early to get something from the store, and Jennifer said this would help me understand the meaning of thankfulness." I looked toward the house, and there they were, my entire extended family crowded around the dining room table. I could see David carving the turkey, his sister Lisa passing the stuffing, my brother Mark reaching for the cranberry sauce. Everyone was there. Everyone except the 8-year-old boy who was literally freezing on the street. Through the window, I watched Jennifer throw her head back in laughter at something someone had said. She was wearing a beautiful cream-colored sweater and pearls, playing the perfect hostess while my grandson stood outside like some kind of punishment case from a Dickens novel. This wasn't discipline. This wasn't a lesson about gratitude. This was systematic cruelty disguised as parenting, and I realized with sickening clarity that this was just what I was seeing on the surface. I lifted Tyler into my arms, feeling how thin he'd gotten, how his shoulder blades protruded through his shirt. "We're going inside right now," I told him, but he shook his head frantically. "No, Grandma, please. I'm supposed to stay out here until Jennifer says I can come in. If I go inside before she says, I'll get in bigger trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Tyler's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Last time I didn't follow the rules. She made me sleep in the basement for 3 nights. She said Dad agreed that I needed to learn consequences, but I heard them fighting about it later. Dad said he didn't know about the basement, but Jennifer said he must have forgotten because they discussed it." My hands were shaking as I carried Tyler toward the front door. Everything was clicking into place now. David's increasing distance from me, Tyler's weight loss, the way Jennifer controlled every interaction. She wasn't just neglecting Tyler, she was systematically isolating him while gaslighting David into believing it was necessary. I could see the pattern now with horrible clarity. Jennifer had slowly convinced David that Tyler was a problem child who needed strict boundaries. She'd probably presented herself as the solution, the stable adult who could handle David's difficult son while building their new life together. Every restriction, every punishment, every moment of cruelty had been carefully framed as being in Tyler's best interest. And David, grieving his failed marriage and desperate to build something beautiful with Jennifer, had been manipulated into abandoning his own son. The front door was locked, but I could see the key hidden under the decorative pumpkin where it had always been. My hands were trembling as I unlocked the door and stepped into the warmth of the house. Tyler still clinging to me. The sound of laughter and conversation filled the air, along with the rich smells of turkey, stuffing, and pumpkin pie. It was exactly the kind of Thanksgiving scene you'd see in a commercial, warm, loving, perfect. Except for the child who'd been locked outside like an unwanted animal. I walked toward the dining room, each step feeling like I was approaching the edge of a cliff. Through the archway, I could see them all. My family, people I loved, people who would never knowingly participate in child abuse, all completely unaware that Tyler had been suffering just outside their view. David was at the head of the table, looking handsome and successful in his button-down shirt, his face relaxed and happy. Lisa was helping her youngest daughter cut her turkey. Mark was explaining something to his wife with animated gestures, and Jennifer sat beside David like a queen, orchestrating the conversation with practiced ease. None of them had any idea that Tyler existed, let alone that he'd been standing outside in dangerous cold for hours. Jennifer had managed this perfectly, a family gathering where the inconvenient child simply disappeared. I took a deep breath and stepped into the doorway, Tyler still in my arms, both of us dripping melted snow onto the hardwood floor. "Get away from that table right now!" The effect was instantaneous. Every conversation stopped. Every fork froze halfway to mouths. Lisa gasped. Mark knocked over his water glass. David's face went white as he took in the sight of Tyler in my arms, clearly suffering from cold exposure. But it was Jennifer's reaction that told me everything I needed to know. For just a split second before she could control her expression, I saw a flash of pure rage cross her face. Not surprise, not concern for Tyler, rage that her perfect dinner party had been interrupted. "Margaret," Jennifer said, her voice steady and sweet. "What a wonderful surprise. We weren't expecting you until later." "While you've been sitting here eating turkey and laughing with my family," I said, my voice shaking with fury, "your stepson has been standing outside in 5-degree weather for hours, wearing nothing but pajamas." David shot to his feet, his chair scraping against the floor. "What? Tyler's upstairs taking a nap. Jennifer said—" "Jennifer said what?" I demanded. "Look at him, David. Look at your son." Tyler raised his head from my shoulder, and the room went completely silent. His lips were still blue. His face was streaked with tears, and his small body was shaking uncontrollably. The contrast between his condition and the warm, festive atmosphere was so stark it was obscene. "Oh my God," Lisa whispered, covering her mouth with her hands. David stared at Tyler, then at Jennifer, confusion and dawning horror warring on his face. "Jennifer, what is he talking about? You said Tyler was sleeping." Jennifer's mask was slipping, but she was fighting to maintain control. "Tyler was being disruptive during breakfast preparations," she said carefully. "I suggested he might benefit from some fresh air and quiet time to think about his behavior. I was planning to bring him in before dinner started." "Fresh air?" Mark stood up, his voice incredulous. "It's 5 below zero outside." "For hours," I added, settling Tyler more securely in my arms. "He's been out there since dawn, Jennifer, since before David left for the store." David's face was cycling through emotions so quickly I could barely track them. Confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally, a terrible understanding. "You told me he was upstairs. When I left, when I came back, you said he was sleeping." "He needed time to reflect on his choices," Jennifer replied, but her voice was getting sharper, more defensive. "Tyler has behavioral issues that require consistent boundaries. We've discussed this, David. Structure and consequences are essential for children who—" "Stop!" David's voice cut through her explanation like a knife. "You left my son outside in freezing weather for hours and lied to me about where he was." The room was deadly quiet except for Tyler shivering. Everyone was staring at Jennifer, waiting for an explanation that could possibly make this okay. Instead, Jennifer's carefully constructed facade finally cracked completely. "This is exactly the problem," she snapped, standing up so abruptly her chair fell backward. "Everyone coddles him. Everyone makes excuses for him. Tyler needs to learn that actions have consequences, and if no one else is willing to teach him that lesson, then I will." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my family's faces as they processed what they were hearing, not an explanation or an apology, but a defense of deliberate cruelty toward a child. Lisa was the first to speak, her voice barely controlled. "Are you seriously standing there defending leaving an 8-year-old outside in dangerous cold?" "I'm standing here defending proper parenting," Jennifer shot back. "Something Tyler clearly hasn't received enough of if he thinks he can disrupt family time whenever he feels like it." David took a step toward her, and I could see years of manipulation finally crumbling in his mind. Family time? He is family. He's my son. He's a constant disruption who prevents us from having any peaceful moments together, Jennifer replied, her voice rising. Do you know what it's like trying to build a life with someone when their child is always demanding attention, always interrupting, always existing? I interrupted, my voice deadly quiet. Is that the problem, Jennifer? That Tyler exists? She turned to face me, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw her real face. Gone was the sweet smile, the careful concern, the practiced perfection. What I saw now was cold calculation and barely contained resentment. Tyler is a reminder of David's failed first marriage, she said, her voice as sharp as broken glass. Every day he's here is a day David can't fully commit to our future together. Some children adjust well to blended families. Tyler obviously cannot. The words hung in the air like poison. In the span of 30 seconds, Jennifer had revealed exactly what Tyler meant to her. An obstacle to be removed, a problem to be solved, a child whose very existence was inconvenient to her vision of her perfect life with David. I looked at my son, watching his face as he finally saw his wife clearly. The woman he'd fallen in love with, the woman he'd chosen over his own mother's concerns, the woman he'd trusted with his child's well-being, had just casually described his son as a problem that needed to be eliminated. The room erupted in chaos after Jennifer's confession. Lisa grabbed her children and hustled them out of the dining room. Mark was on his feet, pointing an accusing finger at Jennifer and demanding to know what kind of monster deliberately endangers a child. But I barely heard any of it because I was watching David's face transform as the full scope of Jennifer's manipulation finally hit him. "You've been lying to me," he said, his voice hollow with realization. "About everything. About Tyler's behavior, about the punishments, about why he's been so quiet lately." Jennifer's composure was completely gone now, her perfect facade shattered beyond repair. "I've been trying to help you create boundaries with a child who clearly has no respect for authority. But apparently, this family is too weak to handle real parenting." "Real parenting?" David's voice was getting louder, angrier. You call leaving my son outside to freeze real parenting?" I carried Tyler to the living room, away from the escalating confrontation, and wrapped him in the throw blanket from the couch. His shivering was finally starting to subside, but I could see the psychological damage went much deeper than physical cold. This 8-year-old boy had learned to accept cruelty as normal, to blame himself for Jennifer's punishments, to stay silent about abuse because he'd been conditioned to believe he deserved it. While David and Jennifer's argument continued in the dining room, I pulled out my phone and started documenting everything. I took photos of Tyler's blue lips, his red and swollen feet, his too thin frame. I opened my weather app and screenshot the temperature reading, -5 degrees Fahrenheit. I started typing notes about everything Tyler had told me, every detail I could remember about the subtle signs I'd dismissed over the past 2 years. Tyler watched me with wide eyes. "Am I in trouble, Grandma?" "No, sweetheart. You're not in trouble. You did nothing wrong. But I need to make sure this never happens to you again." From the dining room, I could hear Jennifer's voice getting shriller, more desperate. "You're choosing him over me, David. After everything I've done for this family, after all the sacrifices I've made, you're going to believe the word of a child who lies constantly." "Tyler doesn't lie," David shot back. "And even if he did, that wouldn't justify what you did today." I heard footsteps, and Mark appeared in the living room doorway. His face was grim as he looked at Tyler, then at me. "Margaret, we need to call the police. This is child endangerment." I nodded, already dialing. But before I could complete the call, David appeared behind Mark, his face pale and stricken. "Mom, please, let me handle this. She's going to get help. We're going to fix this as a family." "Fix what, exactly?" I demanded, standing up to face my son. "Fix the fact that your wife just admitted she sees Tyler as an obstacle to your marriage? Fix the systematic abuse she's been inflicting on your child while you've been at work?" Fix the fact that she left him outside to freeze and then lied to you about where he was? David's face crumpled. I didn't know. I swear to you, Mom, I had no idea it was this bad. But you knew something was wrong, I said, my voice gentler but still firm. You knew Tyler had changed. You knew he'd gotten quieter, more withdrawn. You knew I was worried about him, and you chose to believe Jennifer's explanations instead of investigating further. The truth of that statement hit David like a physical blow. I watched him remember all the times he'd dismissed my concerns, all the times he'd chosen Jennifer's version of events over his own parental instincts. She said Tyler was adjusting to having a stepmother, he whispered. She said he was testing boundaries and that consistency was important. She made it sound like everything she was doing was supported by child psychology research. David, I said carefully. Manipulation victims often don't recognize what's happening to them. Jennifer is very good at what she does. But Tyler has been paying the price for your inability to see through her lies. The police arrived 20 minutes later, followed by a social worker from Child Protective Services. Jennifer had locked herself in the master bedroom and refused to come out, leaving David to face the consequences of her actions alone. Officer Rodriguez was a kind woman in her 40s who specialized in family crisis situations. She listened carefully as I explained what I'd found, showed her the photos I'd taken, and provided Tyler's account of what had happened. The social worker, a man named James Peterson, interviewed Tyler separately, using gentle techniques designed to help children feel safe enough to tell the truth. What Tyler revealed during that interview was worse than I'd imagined. The outdoor punishment wasn't an isolated incident. Jennifer had been escalating her abuse for months, using increasingly cruel methods to teach Tyler respect. She'd locked him in the basement overnight, withheld meals as punishment for talking back, and forced him to stand in corners for hours at a time while she and David enjoyed family activities. Most disturbing of all was how Jennifer had convinced David that these punishments were necessary. She'd shown him articles about tough love parenting, convinced him that Tyler's biological mother had been too permissive, and gradually normalized increasingly harsh consequences for minor childhood behaviors. She told Dad that if he really loved me, he'd let her help me become a better person, Tyler explained to the social worker, his small voice breaking my heart. She said my real mom spoiled me, and that's why I was so difficult. She said the punishments would help me learn to be grateful for what I have. David listened to his son's testimony with tears streaming down his face. Every revelation was another piece of evidence that he'd failed in his most basic duty as a father, protecting his child. When CPS finished their investigation, their recommendation was immediate removal of Tyler from the home until a full evaluation could be completed. Jennifer was arrested and charged with child endangerment, reckless endangerment, and child abuse. David was not criminally charged, but he was required to complete parenting classes and therapy before Tyler could be returned to his custody. I volunteered to take emergency temporary custody of Tyler, and thankfully, my clean background check and stable living situation made me an acceptable placement option. As we prepared to leave David's house that night, Tyler ran to his father and threw his arms around his waist. "I'm sorry, Daddy," he sobbed. "I'm sorry I was such a bad kid that Jennifer had to punish me so much." David dropped to his knees and pulled Tyler into his arms, both of them crying. "You are not a bad kid," he said fiercely. "You are the best kid in the world, and none of this was your fault. None of it. I'm the one who should be sorry. I'm the one who failed to protect you." The trial 3 months later was a media sensation. Jennifer's defense team tried to paint her as a well-intentioned stepmother who'd used poor judgment in her disciplinary methods. They brought in expert witnesses to discuss the challenges of blended families and the stress of parenting children from previous relationships. But the prosecution had Tyler's testimony, my photographs, testimony from neighbors who'd witnessed Jennifer screaming at Tyler in the yard, and most damning of all, text messages Jennifer had sent to her sister complaining about Tyler and expressing her wish that David would choose his future over his past. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Jennifer was sentenced to 18 months in prison and 5 years of probation. She was also ordered to have no contact with Tyler and to complete anger management and parenting classes before she could ever be around children again. But the real transformation happened during those 3 months Tyler lived with me. Away from Jennifer's constant criticism and impossible standards, Tyler began to bloom. He started laughing again, asking questions, expressing opinions. He gained weight and lost the perpetual wariness that had characterized his behavior for so long. David, meanwhile, was doing the hard work of understanding how he'd been manipulated. His therapist helped him recognize the patterns of emotional abuse Jennifer had used not just on Tyler, but on him as well. She'd isolated him from his family, convinced him that his parenting instincts were wrong, and gradually normalized increasingly concerning behavior. She never started with leaving Tyler outside in freezing weather, David explained to me during one of our weekly coffee meetings. It began with little things, suggesting that Tyler's bedtime was too late, that he watched too much TV, that he needed more structure. Everything she suggested sounded reasonable, so I went along with it. And then the suggestions became more extreme? David nodded. But by then, I was already convinced that she understood child development better than I did. When she suggested consequences that seemed harsh, she'd show me articles about how modern parents are too permissive. She made me believe that being strict was actually being loving. The manipulation had been systematic and brilliant. Jennifer had used David's love for Tyler against him, convincing him that accepting her increasingly harsh methods was proof of his commitment to Tyler's well-being. Every time David hesitated or questioned her approach, she'd frame his doubts as weakness or inconsistency that would ultimately harm Tyler's development. When Tyler finally returned to David's custody 6 months later, it was to a completely different home environment. Jennifer's belongings were gone, her influence erased. David had sold the house on Maple Street, too many bad memories, and bought a smaller place closer to Tyler's school and to me. Most importantly, David had learned to trust his own parental instincts again. He'd also reached out to Sarah, Tyler's biological mother, and they'd worked together to establish a co-parenting relationship that put Tyler's needs first. Sarah had moved back to town, and now Tyler split his time between both parents, with me as a consistent presence in his life. The change in Tyler was remarkable. The quiet, fearful child who'd been slowly disappearing under Jennifer's abuse was replaced by a confident, happy boy who felt safe enough to be himself. He joined Little League, made friends at school, and most importantly, learned to trust that the adults in his life would protect him. 1 year after that terrible Thanksgiving, we gathered again around a dinner table. This time, it was in David's new house, with Tyler helping serve the mashed potatoes and Sarah laughing at something Mark had said. The conversation was loud and chaotic, full of interruptions and spilled gravy and Tyler's excited chatter about his upcoming school play. It was everything a family dinner should be, imperfect, genuine, and full of love. During dessert, Tyler climbed into my lap, something he'd started doing again since he'd been living with me. "Grandma," he said quietly, "thank you for saving me that day." I hugged him tight, remembering the scared, frozen child I'd found on the sidewalk. "You don't need to thank me, sweetheart. That's what families do. We protect each other." But privately, I knew Tyler had saved all of us. His courage in finally telling the truth had exposed Jennifer's abuse and forced our family to confront some uncomfortable realities about how we'd all failed to protect him. It had also brought us closer together than we'd ever been before. David had learned that being a good parent sometimes means making hard choices, even when those choices hurt people you love. I'd learned that sometimes grandmothers have to step in when parents can't see clearly, and Tyler had learned that he was worthy of love and protection, that his voice mattered, and that speaking up about abuse wasn't betrayal. It was survival. The last I heard, Jennifer had been released from prison but had moved across the country. She'd never attempted to contact David or Tyler, which was probably for the best. Some wounds are too deep to heal, some trust too broken to rebuild. But Tyler thrived in the aftermath of her absence. He grew tall and strong, excelled in school, and developed into a kind, empathetic young person who used his experience to help other children in difficult situations. At 15, he volunteered with a local organization that supported kids in foster care, using his story to help others understand that abuse is never their fault and that asking for help is an act of courage, not weakness. Looking back now, I realize that Terrible Thanksgiving was actually a gift in disguise. Yes, it exposed the worst-case scenario we'd all been unconsciously avoiding, but it also revealed the unshakable strength of our family's love for each other and our commitment to protecting the most vulnerable among us. Jennifer had tried to destroy Tyler's spirit, but instead, she'd only made our family stronger. And Tyler, the little boy who'd once stood shivering on a sidewalk in frozen pajamas, grew up to become exactly the kind of man who would never let anyone else suffer in silence. That's the real victory. Not just that we stopped the abuse, but that we transformed the trauma into wisdom, the pain into purpose, and the broken trust into something even stronger than what we'd started with.